Hello, this is Stephen Nojiri, and this is another Tada Genji tradition video. In a previous video series, I taught an overview of the Kusunoki Ryu Shinobi Arts, or aka Kusunoki Ryu ninjutsu. And for that video, I based it mostly on two specific documents. Now, if you remember from the video series, I focused mostly on the older documents. So that one, the first one, is a record utilized by the Taiheki Ryu and the Aizu branch Kusunoki Ryu from the 1590s. Now this document was probably also utilized by the Nanki Ryu as well, but specifically we can definitely link it to Taiheki Ryu and the Aizu Kusunoki Ryu. Now that document describes the Kusunoki Shinobi within a larger context of the Kusunoki Ryu teachings. In other words, the document is about Kusunoki teachings in general. It's a larger document, and there's a section where it talks about Shinobi. The second document that I mentioned was the Kusunoki Shinobi scroll, and that of course focuses just on Shinobi arts. And I had said that it's a later scroll from the somewhere in the mid 1600s, give or take. It has 100 something entries, etc., etc., etc. But I didn't focus on it much because in the original video series I wanted to focus on the history, the framework of what is Kusunoki Ryu ninjutsu, what is the shinobi, and we talked about like Dako shinobi, Inko shinobi, etc., etc. And that all is best explained by utilizing the document from the 1590s. Now in this video, so the previous video is focused on document number 1. This video is going to take a look at document number 2, or the Kusunoki Ryu Shinobi no Maki. And what I'm going to do is we're going to just talk about it a little bit and go through it some, because I wanted you guys to just have a little bit more exposure to this document. So the Kusunoki Ryu Shinobi no Maki does have a few different versions, and the differences are mostly in the title or the initial arrangement of the beginning of the document. There is a very, very simple version of the document which just has the different entries listed by title with no further explanation or commentary. It's just the names of all the different teachings. But for the most part, there's a couple of different versions that exist, and so I've looked at the different versions, and once you have access to multiple versions, you have a good amount of data to work with. The other thing that's unclear is who is the author of the document. So on the screen I've put 4 potential possibilities. Now in my opinion, number 1 and 2 are the most likely. So I believe the document was most likely written by Yui Shosetsu from Nanki Ryu, or one of the master instructors, close disciples of Yui Shosetsu. So Yui Shosetsu, and if not him, somebody like Shimada Sensei, possibly. The other strong possibility is that it was written by Inami Yoshimichi. Now he's an Aizu Kusunoki Ryu scholar, so he's one of the main instructors of the Aizu Kusunoki school, or the Aizu Kusunoki tradition. I also strongly believe that he probably is the author as well. So it's either 1 or 2. A third potential, however very unlikely, is someone known as Ando Sensei. Ando Sensei did a lot of commentary on Kusunoki Ryu documents. However, he didn't really ever, I don't have any examples of him writing anything new, only doing commentary. So I don't think he is actually a good potential author. And then lastly, number 4 is that it's written by somebody else. It's just somebody that hasn't clearly been identified as being a potential author of the text. I know that there are some people that speculate that perhaps the document was written by someone in Shin Kusunoki Ryu, because we know that Shin Kusunoki Ryu uses this document. Now, it's possible. However, based on the contents of the document and based on the overall history of Kusunoki Ryu, I think that that's too late in the history for the document. The document, in other words, if you analyze the history of the document itself, that doesn't seem right. So even though nobody currently knows who wrote it anymore, like that data has been lost, most likely it was either number 1 or number 2. So as I said, we know the document appears to be utilized by various practitioners of the main Kusunoki lines, as well as some of the offshoots. So for example, we know the document does end up becoming an important document within the Shin Kusunoki, aka Natori Ryu teachings. So this document gets around among Kusunoki Ryu and Kusunoki Ryu branches. We also know that the document's influence does spread outside of Kusunoki Ryu. We find non-Kusunoki Ryu traditions having copies of the document. The question, though, is when and how they acquired the document. That's the key debatable point. Because if they acquired the document in the 1600s, that's one thing. But if they acquired the document in the 1700s or 1800s, it changes everything. So when and how they acquired the document is a key piece of data which is debatable. It's being investigated, etc., etc., etc. And also, the next slide, there's one more warning before we get into talking about the document itself. Okay, so I'm going to bring this up now, and I'm going to mention it again later. But it's important to understand that this document is pre-1680. All right, and there are many documents that pop up post-1680 that claim the Kusunoki name. And many of them are simply attempts by the authors to connect or to cash in on the Kusunoki name. There's a handful of documents that claim to be the Kusunoki Ryu Shinobi no Maki or the Kusunoki Ryu Ikansho, various other documents by various other names. And most of them appear at the end of the 1600s. Now, there's a couple of them that appear a little earlier, but for the most part, these sort of cash in on the name documents pop up in the late 1600s. Now, they're not actually connected to the Kusunoki Ryu teachings, but what they are is they're either older documents that have been sort of edited and compiled in different weird ways and given a new title, or they're just made up and someone slapped the Kusunoki name on them. You have to be very careful of these later period documents. This is where having a good knowledge of the Kusunoki history and the tradition can help you weed out the documents that are legit versus the documents that were generated just to cash in on the name. So now let's look briefly at some of the things contained within the document. The document opens up with an extremely deep philosophical teaching given in two parts. So the first part is the meaning of shinobi, and the second part is the new meaning of 5 shinobi. Now, these are not military teachings in any sort of tactical or mechanical sense. These are philosophical instructions given to provide the student with the correct mindset. Without the correct mindset, the entire framework of the shinobi arts fails to come together as was intended by the authors. Sure, you can pick up a few mechanical techniques here and there, but there isn't a sense of completeness of the teachings without the correct mindset. So let's start by looking at the explanation of the meaning of shinobi. So the document gives 2 levels of shinobi. The first one, as you see written on the screen, is written this way, and it's often that kanji, it gives the 2 kanji. So in parentheses, I've given you sort of the more common way it's written, within a grammatical context. But the original document just uses the single kanji. So the first one is shino, but the word is shinogu, and the second one is shino, and the word is shinobi. Now, these are levels like the worldly level and then the more profound level, right? So the first one, this is the novice level of shinobi, and this means endurance, defiance, to rise above, to stave off. The text gives us the example of using your war fan to block the sunlight. So basically it's saying like the oppressive heat of the sun can be defied by holding the fan up. So basically when you hold the fan up to the sunlight and you're putting that little bit of shadow over your face, you are staving off the sunlight. You're defying the sunlight. And this is the novice level definition of shinobi, utilizing this kanji. This version or this level entails a sense of struggle. Now the second level, the profound level, shinobi, as you know, blade over the heart shinobi, this is the profound level, and it means acceptance. But it means acceptance with the dharmic meaning. So this kanji in Sanskrit is called ksanti, K-A-S-A-N-T-I, ksanti. And what it means is the perfection of patience. And the perfection of patience is acceptance with a sense of emptiness, right? A sense of insight into emptiness. So in this profound level, the samurai does not endure anything. They're not defying anything, but is a sense of acceptance with a sense of emptiness. So in the novice level, there is a sense of struggling, there's a defiance, but in the profound level, there is no struggle. This teaching is then followed up with the new meaning of the 5 shinobi. Again, originally, it's 6 shinobi with the 5 spies known as the 5 types of shinobi with the Dako shinobi added, but here it becomes the 5 shinobi or the 5 acceptances. It's not a military function or a military role, it's a mental function. So what these are, and I'm going to paraphrase here, I'm not going to give the exact teaching word for word, I'm just going to summarize here. So the 5 are acceptance of life, which is essentially that you must accept being alive, right? No matter what problems or shame comes your way, you must keep living, right? You have to accept life. 2, acceptance of death. Do not fear death for any reason, and accept that death is part of your path of loyalty, part of your devotion. So because you have this devotion and loyalty, it will probably get you killed at some point, and you accept that. Number 3 is acceptance of desires. You have to discipline your desires. And it says, not just for gold and silver, but for whatever tempts your heart. So rather than, having this lifelong struggle with your desires, you just have to accept that you have desires and that you have to temper them and you have to control them. You just accept that and you do it. 4, acceptance of the self. Even if you feel the need to act or say something, you have to learn to let it go. You have to silence yourself. This comes up many times because the shinobi path, you're oftentimes pretending to be someone that you're not. And so you're always going to have impulses to say or do things that you would want to say or do. But the person you're pretending to be would not say it or would not do it. So there's this acceptance of the self, basically silencing your own impulses and just going along with the role that you need to do. And then 5, acceptance of humanity. And it basically is like this sense of not getting used to flattering people. Do not flatter, do not obey. Become independent and follow the path of your own mind. So it's this sense of accepting that you have to be independent. Within the content, within the text itself, the idea is that human beings always exist in these sort of dynamics, like these samsaric dynamics, right? Human beings, they desire, they're interconnected. Not and the emphasis is not interconnected in ways that are positive, but it's like interconnected in ways that are problematic. Like human beings always lie to each other, they flatter each other, they pretend to like each other, all of these things. And what this is saying is you accept that that's how human beings are, and then you rise beyond it, you go beyond it, you become independent and follow the path of your own mind. So let's take a moment to just look at that again. We can actually see a lot of the original Kusunoki Ryu teachings within this opening. The opening is short and it doesn't go into great detail. The commentary gives just enough that if you're familiar with Kusunoki Ryu history and teachings, you can understand more completely what is being said. For example, the reason the 5 shinobi are appearing as a mental teaching and not a function is because, remember from the previous videos, many of the traditions condensed shinobi no jutsu just into Dako no shinobi. Remember, it was 6 and then it just gets reduced into Dako. This point would be lost on someone unfamiliar with the original teachings or the historical timeline, right? So at the time that this text is written, the 6 have just turned into Dako shinobi or shinobi, and therefore the 5 shinobi that used to be taught sort of aren't existing as a teaching so much anymore. So then it's almost in a way reborn as a mental instruction and not as a military mechanical instruction. Also, one needs to be familiar with Kusunoki Ryu's use of certain Buddhist esoteric concepts, or else things such as acceptance may be misunderstood as well. So if you don't know that the kanji blade over heart is meant to be read as acceptance with the dharmic understanding, the Sanskrit santi, then the section where it's talking about accepting these things might be misread as enduring the things, but endurance is that novice level. acceptance is the second level. So and the reason that you would know to read it this way is because you're familiar with you're familiar with the vocabulary and the usage of the vocabulary from all of the other Kusunoki documents. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's look at some random examples. I'm not going in any particular order. I've just picked 16 points, so it's like 130 plus points. I'm going to pull 16. We're just going to look at them, and then we'll call it a day. So the first point is going to be 3 disguises. So according to the Kusunoki Ryu Shinobi Maki, the 3 disguises are Komuso, which makes sense because we know the Kusunoki family has a connection to the Komuso tradition. The next is monks and nuns, particularly nuns when it comes for females. And then the last one is fishermen. Now, if you've been following these videos, you know that the fisherman has a Jingunden connection. According to the Jingunden, the original Japanese spy was a deity who was a fisherman who was then hired by Emperor Jimmu to be like the first official spy. So, yeah, but being a fisherman also makes a great disguise in general, because you can be on land, you can be on water, you can have boats, you can have hooks and lines and ladders and all kinds of stuff. So and you can sort of wander around. So hunter slash fisherman, but in particular, fisherman. It's very specific that it's a fisherman in the text, very specific. So those 3. Next, many of you will be familiar with this, using your sword to climb a wall or a fence, etc., etc. This also well known in Fukushima Ryu as well. But this does open the doorway to a teaching that talks about putting small grappling hooks on the end of your sagyo. So because you have to use your sagyo in this process. So if you remember from previous videos, there's all these different ways to use the sagyo in the Tada Genji tradition. There's different lengths of sagyo and this, and also we know from just shinobi arts in general, there's all these different ways of using the sagyo. But this, like I said, this opens the conversation to putting a small hook on the end of your sagyo cord. That then goes into this next one, which is using your grappling hook or your hook and sagyo to lock or tie off doors. So there's this idea that if you need to shut a door or shut a gate and you have nothing to really shut it with, there's a technique where you use a grappling hook or your sagyo with a hook on the end to actually sort of lock the door or lock the gate. Number 4, methods for picking locks. Now, anybody who's been following my videos over the years know that I have a really soft spot in my heart for lock picking. I've demonstrated how to pick old Edo period locks before. I really enjoy doing it. So it makes me happy. The lock picking is included here. And you have the wood and metal shim method, but you also have a special method utilizing cloth. So it's quite interesting. Number 5, black board or black cloth. And this is basically utilizing a board painted black or a black piece of cloth to hide yourself in shadows when sneaking into or out of a location. Number 6, and number 5, interestingly enough, using the black cloth. I've actually seen people in modern days doing private investigation have actually used something similar to this. It's amazing what you can get away with. I don't know with a black board, but with a black piece of cloth, you can actually trick people's eyes pretty easily. Number 6, using your fan and sword to determine if someone is coming or going. Now, I know this one popped up in the ninja community a while back, and there was all this controversy over how it was supposed to be done. But this text is very clear that you hold the sword upright, vertically, and that the fan goes horizontally over the guard. Okay? Now, the text specifically says to do it this way. It even goes so far as to say that it's like when you use the ju, the kanji for 10, as a particle on kanji, such as a needle. So it's real specific that the sword is a long vertical and that the fan is a short horizontal. Very specific. And then basically once you have it that way, you just watch to see if the light's moving away, if it's going up or down towards the fan. Let's see, next one, number 7, using dogs. Now here, dogs is a code word. It's code for an assistant shinobi. So the text says that the way that this is a code word is found in the kanji for dog, being composed of the kanji for one and the kanji for person, with the additional stroke being the assistant. Now, technically, this isn't grammatically correct, unless something has changed since the 1600s. That's not actually how you're supposed to write the kanji for dog, but that doesn't really matter because in the end, this is a special way of understanding the coded terms. So when you see what looks like the kanji for dog, you're not supposed to, it's not supposed to be written in the stroke order that is correct, but it's supposed to be the concept of a single person with an assistant. Number 8, thieves. Now, as I've mentioned many times in many videos, the text is very clear that shinobi are not thieves. There's a great amount of effort put into distancing shinobi, which are spies, from thieves. But the text does say that a shinobi should study with thieves because thieves are better than shinobi at sneaking in and out of places. And the reason it says they're better is because a shinobi just, sneaks in and out of places themselves, but thieves have to actually sneak in and steal items and bring those items back out. So that's harder and that requires more skill. Therefore, shinobi should study with thieves. Not the shinobi's not supposed to take on any of the morality or mindset of a thief, but in terms of just studying the art of sneaking in and sneaking out, it says study with thieves. Don't become a thief. Don't take on their mindset, but learn how they do it. Next up, number 9. And number 9 is actually several different entries that I'm combining into this one. There's a lot of word games or mind games, such as to learn how much money someone has, put them into a position where they're asked to purchase an expensive item, things like that. Just all kinds of methods to figure out what resources somebody has. And you can, and again, there's many entries, but they're all basically some kind of mind game to trick someone into showing what they can and can't do. Now then, going into number 10, using colored stones or colored rice to keep count of enemy forces. Some of you have heard of this before. It's like, for every cavalry, use this 1 grain of this color or 1 stone of this color, or for every foot soldier this there. And it's a way of trying to keep count without keeping an easier way to keep count, etc., etc. That's also mentioned in here as well. Number 11. A series of, particularly one entry where it says causing strange or weird things over there to draw attention away from over here. This is if you're familiar with shinobi documents, this is pretty much a staple of shinobi documents. It's misdirection. It's the art of misdirection. But what's interesting is that in the commentary, Yui Shosetsu was directly mentioned in the commentary on this one. It talks about Yui Shosetsu's teachings, how he used to teach this technique. So I find it interesting because the whoever wrote the particular commentary is directly their commentary is alluding to the fact that they had studied under Yui Shosetsu, perhaps. So again, it doesn't prove that Yui Shosetsu wrote the original, but it does prove that there's a Nankiryu connection in here, because the author is talking about Yui Shosetsu as if the commentator is talking about Yui Shosetsu as if they had studied under him. Number 12. Anyone familiar with shinobi text should know that this would pop up somewhere. So floatation devices. Now, unfortunately, the construction style, or the style and the construction method, are not listed, but it basically just lists that you need to be trained in and utilize flotation devices. So exactly, like I said, which style doesn't say, but definitely if you're shinobi, you have to have some type of flotation devices. Point 13, emphasis on having the entrance and exit routes well laid out ahead of time. This covers the creation and usage of maps. So I know that some people don't seem to understand that shinobi and maps have a special relationship to each other, and this particular entry should close the gap on that distance between people in people's minds. It specifically says that because the shinobi has to have their route laid out, the entry and the exit laid out, they need to create maps, and they need to study their maps, and they need to have the entry and exit planned out utilizing maps. So hopefully that hopefully that helps some people understand that the art of maps and the art of shinobi go together, because I know that from my own experience with just talking with people over the years, there seems to be this disconnect. People don't seem to comprehend why maps and shinobi go together, but this entry right here says specifically maps and shinobi go hand in hand. The shinobi should know how to create maps. They need to study, they need to create them, and they need to plan based on the maps. And then let's see, number 14, Hinso. We had a video on Hinso, specifically the methods for changing your appearance, clothing, makeup, etc. The Hinso method is in the original Kusunoki teachings. But remember, it's not really used for sneaking in. It's originally used for sneaking away. Number 15. Now this one's important because this is one of those ones that pegs all of these teachings as being for samurai. There's a section that is specifically teachings on how to stop behaving like a samurai and how to blend in with commoners. And we'll close out with number 16, which is a teaching that's listed that says you need to get others to sneak into places for you, especially if the enemy has any idea that you're going to be sneaking in. Now this is important because, again, so many people have this idea that the shinobi is always the person who's doing the sneaking in. And while the shinobi can sneak in, as I have tried to say in books and videos over a decade, the shinobi usually gets someone else to do the actual sneaking in for them. So this opens up the entire explanation for a shinobi convincing a local person to do the sneaking in. This opens up the door for a shinobi getting an enemy retainer to switch sides, and then the shinobi gives orders to that turned enemy retainer, and it's the turned enemy retainer who does all of the sneaking in and out of places. So that entire conversation opens up with this one line of get others to do the sneaking in for you. Again, if you have to do it yourself, you have to do it yourself, but you should get someone else to do it, especially when the enemy is probably aware that you're going to be sneaking in. Right, and so anyway, the document goes on and on and on. As I've said, there's over 130 entries, each with various commentary. If you have a good grasp of Kusunoki Ryu history and teachings, you will surely understand the deeper points of the entries. But even without such knowledge, there's still a substantial amount of information to be learned just from the surface level. But before we close this video out, let's finish with a few key points. There are a few different versions of the document, as I said earlier, and they're mostly the same, but there are some slight differences. One version just has the entry titles, no commentary whatsoever. However, with access to multiple versions, you get a really good idea of what's being said. The other point, again, the author is unknown at this time. There are a few possibilities, but at present, none of the potential authors stand out as the most obvious. There are strong pros and cons for the main contenders. I still say it's either Yui Shosetsu, one of his disciples, or it's Inami Yoshimichi. Third, the document is clearly written in the 1600s, but prior to the 1680s. It matches the grammar, the style, and it fits nicely into the culture of Kusunoki Ryu during the time period. This document is a solid document. Last 2 points on next slide. Beware of Kusunoki Ryu documents that appear in the late 1600s, the later parts, right? Now, like I said, there are some that pop up in the 1650s which are dubious and are clearly provable to not be authentic. But for the most part, most of the questionable, dubious documents pop up post 1680. Many of them are just reprints of old documents with different titles, which is fine. But some of them are made up material that's just made up by somebody and they slap Kusunoki on the title. It has no connection to the teaching, no connection to any of the schools, etc., etc., etc. So you got to be careful of those. That's where a knowledge of the history and a knowledge of the tradition helps to weed out the real material from these fake documents. Finally, lastly, this document is clearly written for a samurai. It contains several entries which specifically discuss being a samurai and are methods which would require one to be a samurai in order to enact the method. As such, this document still reflects the original Kusunoki Ryu teaching that of a samurai as a shinobi. So this is that before the Edo period trend of using ronin and or doshin level persons to fill the shinobi job openings. So again, this is important because remember from the previous video, while the official job of shinobi became a doshin ashigaru level job in the 1600s, the Kusunoki Ryu tradition did not teach that shinobi would come from doshin or ashigaru level. In the Kusunoki Ryu tradition, the mainline tradition, the shinobi is always a samurai. And this document still addresses the shinobi as a samurai. So it's even further connects to the Kusunoki mainline traditions. And that is it for this video. As always, these videos are meant to be brief, and they are meant to inspire you or to give you a starting off point. The material in this video is copywritten by me, so please do not steal this material. Please do not take it. Please do not copy it. Again, I hope it inspires you. I hope that it sets you off on your own investigations and explorations.